Yo, what's up guys, Rackles here. So Hypixel Tournaments have always infamously had at least something go wrong with pretty much all of them. As I'm recording this, the second ever Gridge tournament just ended. Don't mean to flex, but I am currently sitting in the top 100, so I'm kind of a big deal like that. The most recent one before this was Wool Wars. After that one ended, they basically went, oops, we kind of messed up, so we're actually going to cancel this tournament and do it again next week. Sorry guys. Which I think has probably been like the biggest issue they've had, where they've actually had to entirely reschedule a tournament and redo it. But today specifically, I wanted to talk about the Quakecraft tournaments, since those are the ones that I have the most experience with. So to get started with the Quake tournaments, the first ever one was actually announced on October 13th, 2013. And if that date surprises you, well, that's because the tournament never happened. It was announced on Twitter and Facebook that it would take place next week, and it would have made use of Hypixel's legacy tournament system, which they used from 2013 to 14. That worked with a slightly different system that awarded you more points for stuff like kills and wins, but actually subtracted points for stuff like deaths and losses. And it also used a different currency, which was called tournament tokens instead of the tournament tributes we have today. After that 2013 announcement, they even added an achievement into the game for participating in a Quake tournament. But sadly, this tournament just never happened. Nothing more was ever said about the matter, and the only two tournaments to use Hypixel's legacy tournament system were Walls and Mega Walls. Some point later, that achievement was just kind of silently removed, and to this day, it remains the only Quakecraft achievement to be removed from the game. So after they lied to us in 2013, it would take another 7 years for the actual first Quake tournament. It was announced on January 24th, 2020, and it followed a similar format to all the previous tournaments that have been using the new tournament system. It had 6 maps, 5 different divisions, which each earned better rewards as you climbed higher and higher, and 250 games to play, something which the admins claimed would take about 4 hours. This is completely not true. If you took an incredible player under like perfect conditions, they could probably get around 1,000 kills or 40 wins per hour, so 250 games would take at minimum 6 hours. And again, that's for an absolutely amazing player who's playing basically just full non-queues that are queuing back to back to back, and he's winning all of them. But this is a tournament setting, which means that the games are going to be way harder, they're going to take longer to win, and the games are going to take a lot longer to fill, especially in the higher brackets. Well, a week after the announcement, the tournament officially started, and less than 30 minutes later, they had to stop it completely. Basically, they completely messed it up, and people were just getting put into brackets they didn't belong into, and the games weren't really properly being tracked, all sorts of issues. Thankfully, after stopping it, they were able to restart the tournament about an hour later, but it didn't take too long for people to notice that there was another pretty big flaw, and that was that the spawn protection was just insanely long. So the normal spawn prot in Quake Solo is like about half a second or less, but at the tournament, it was over 2 seconds. Now, if I do some simple math here, we take the average kill death ratio of the players who finish top 3 in the tournament, and it's 1.65, which means they die about 15 times per game. We'd also say that the average Grandmaster game probably took around a minute 30 to maybe 2 minutes at the longest, which means that with 15 deaths in that time, you would be invincible for over 1/3 of the game, in a game mode that the entire purpose of it is that it's fast-paced and you have to have quick reaction times. And again, this is for top players who should theoretically have had the best stats. For the worst players who were in the lower divisions, they would have died even more times and spent an even higher percentage of the game being invincible. Obviously, this generated a lot of complaints, and people started spamming the hashtag #NotMyQuake. But the admins completely denied that the spawn prot was changed at all and said it was just like normal. Evidently, trying to talk to them in-game wasn't really working, so some people decided to go bring their complaints over to the forums. The admins' response was to give a laughing reaction, and they just continued to deny that the spawn protection was broken. Eventually, Simon Hypixel himself had to step up and admit that, yeah, it was very obviously wrong. He stated that it was just a few milliseconds and that it wasn't the end of the world. And while I agree that it wasn't the end of the world, saying just a few milliseconds wasn't very accurate, because again, we are now playing tournament games where people are invincible for over 1/3 of the game, and instead of trying to actively go after and shoot players, a lot of the time if they spawned near you, you'd actually have to run away from them, which is completely against what you would normally do in Quake. Despite the spawn prot being broken, they decided not to reset the tournament for a second time, which is a choice I absolutely agree with, since it already took them a day to look into the issue, and fixing it just midway through the tournament would have been kind of unfair for the people who had already had to play with this sort of weird rule set. So surely that was the last major issue with this tournament, right? Well, you'd be wrong, because the point distribution for the top brackets was insanely flawed. Because Grandmaster was so hard to win, or even get top 4 in to retain Grandmaster or get any significant amount of points, many players realized that unless you were just a god at the game, it was way more worthwhile to stay in Masters and intentionally get second place. As more and more people figured this out, it got to the point towards the end of the tournament where there were entire Master bracket games where the whole lobby was just tied at 24 until someone finally stepped up and took the last kill. Because of this, Grandmaster games took forever, which added even more hours onto how long it took to complete all 250 games. After this tournament ended, a solid chunk of the top 100 used this strategy, with some players not even reaching reaching 30 wins, which would make for a win-loss of 12%. Despite the fact that entire lobbies and so much of the top 100 were outright teaming and arguably boosting, not a single one of them got banned. In fact, at the time, it was the tournament with the least bans in the top 100 ever because there was only one single banned player, Purelore. He finished 14th, and according to him, he was banned because he was joking with guild members about getting boosted, and the admins didn't take too kindly to that. Because he was considered one of the best players at the time with over 300,000 lifetime kills, most of the community took his side on this and started spamming free Purelore. But sadly, the admins didn't listen. He had to wait out the full duration of his ban, and he missed out on all the rewards. Also, when they first announced the tournament and said that everybody would have access to maxed out upgrades, some players raised the concerns of people unlocking achievements that they actually shouldn't be able to. The admins put these worries to rest and basically confirmed that no, they thought of this and it wouldn't be a problem, but it turns out that they didn't think of it and it would be a problem. Basically, players were able to unlock the achievements for winning with the Reaper and the Platinum Smelter, both of which would normally take at least 100,000 kills or more. Additionally, winning with the Platinum Smelter is the prerequisite for unlocking the fastest dash cooldown, which meant that players were able to unlock upgrades for regular gameplay up to 100,000 kills earlier than they were supposed to. Now that was a lot of complaining, so let me go over some of the good things. Like I said, there was 6 maps available, and I think that the map pool was actually really good. For me personally, I skipped Demonic almost every time just because of how unbelievably campy it is, and I skipped Woodstone a decent amount of the time too, just because of how chaotic it was. But that was just my personal preference, and I know most people played all of the 6 maps. Another fantastic thing was the format that they used, ignoring the points distribution, of course. Obviously, right, I love Quake, but even ignoring that bias, I just really genuinely think that Quakecraft is one of the best modes for Hypixel's tournament system. Because unlike Skywars and Bed Wars, where there's so much RNG, if you die early, then you're just completely out of it without getting any chance of points whatsoever. In Quake, even if you have a bad game where you die a ton or just don't really get too many kills, you at least have the chance to fully play out the game from start to finish, same as everybody else in that game, which means you have way more of a fair chance to earn yourself some extra points. In my eyes, these types of modes where everybody finishes at the same time are so much better for a tournament system, and they make it so much less dependent on stuff like RNG of getting bad loot or targeted and hacked on, so on and so forth. And speaking of, there basically aren't any hackers in Quake. The only single ban in this tournament was boosting, because most hacks like B-Hop and Reach don't help at all, and virtually no one in the Quake community uses visual hacks like ESP or X-Ray because they just genuinely aren't very helpful at a high level. In the end of all the chaos and all the complaining that went down in this tournament, I still really personally enjoyed it. I ended up placing 23rd, which was pretty good for me. At this time, I was actually still fairly new to the game, and I wasn't taking the tournament very seriously. I was still pretty new to the game, my aim wasn't very good, I didn't know the map super well, and I basically spent the entire tournament just chilling in Discord talking with my friends. Also, in the end, I finished exactly 1 spot above the legend himself, Technoblade, who also had some choice words to say about the tourney's spawn prod issues. Now, although I personally really loved this tournament, I left a lot of players with sort of a bitter taste in their mouth just because of all the issues. But thankfully, almost 2 years later, on December 10th, 2021, it was announced that there was going to be a second iteration Quakecraft tournament. And right off the bat, they addressed the most important thing: they fixed the spawn protection issue. Now, for me personally, this was actually a fairly bad time for the tournament to happen, because not only was my grandma visiting from across the country, but I was also getting really close to reaching 1 million overall Quake kills, and I was trying to save it so I could throw a big party and do my quadruple prestige in Skywars, Bed Wars, Pit, and Quakecraft all at the same time. I ended up making a video about that, by the way, so you should go check it out after this. But basically, this meant that if I wanted to practice for the tournament at all, and obviously I did, I ended up having to get 1 million way earlier than I expected and push the party forward, which meant that a lot of people who were originally scheduled to be there couldn't make it. Now, to recap the first tournament, the biggest 3 issues were the spawn protection, which we've already covered has been fixed, the number of games, and the point distribution. We already know that they fixed spawn prot, so how did they go about fixing the other 2 issues? They didn't. In the announcement, they had the exact same point distribution, and they still kept the ridiculous 250 game limit. Understandably, this made a lot of people pretty upset and disappointed, but thankfully the Quake community was able to give all of our suggestions for how to fix the problem to a member of the Hypixel Player Council, who was then able to forward all of our feedback onto the appropriate admin who could make the changes. In the end, we decided on lowering the amount of games down to 200 and to double the points earned per kill while you were in the Grandmaster bracket. And these changes ended up being fantastic. It made being in the Grandmaster bracket so much more lucrative, which meant that there weren't tons of players intentionally throwing all their games to avoid getting into it. And it also meant that people didn't have to play 10 hours of tournament games. The Hypixel Player Council is kind of one of those things that you sometimes forget exist, but it's really useful to have them in these situations. So I'm thankful that it still exists. Just kidding, as of a few months ago, they completely disbanded it. So now if anything ever happens like this again, we no longer have a way to get our feedback to the admins. Isn't that great? Anyways, aside from those technical changes, there are also a few differences compared to the first tournament. One thing was that they added a new map mapped the rotation. Another was that the names and skins are now obscured before the game starts, which has become the standard for all of the tournaments. It was also the first tournament to require Microsoft account migration. Partially as a result of those last two things, this tournament had a bit of a new problem that the last one didn't. Alts. And while yeah, it's true that the top 2 players of the last tournament were both alts, they both played only on a single account, so I don't really care. This time, probably at least 15% or more of the top 100 was made up of alts, and that's after a large percentage of them were banned. Also, while some of these alts were people who weren't able to migrate their account or had a competitive ban status, there were a lot of people who took up top 100 spots on 2 or even more accounts. It felt like an insane amount of people were finishing their games on one account and then just hopping straight onto the next account to steal top spots and rewards from actual legitimate players, which I think is pretty disappointing. Now, I took this tournament a lot more seriously than the last one. Admittedly, probably way too serious. Like I said, in the first tournament, I was still fairly new to the game. I didn't bother dodging anybody, and I just queued all the games pretty much back to back while chilling in a Discord call. This time, I had so much more experience in the game, and I knew I could do so much better. So I made use of some different strats to give myself the best chance possible. And yes, let me just say in advance, some of the strats I used were pretty cringe. But hey, in the end, they worked, and I got a position I'm happy with, so I can't complain too much. So to start with, almost everybody who finished in the top 10 of both the first and the second tournament are actually all in the same private Discord server. And because names and skins are now obscured, we came up with a method to recognize each other so that we could avoid being in each other's games if we wanted to. So basically, what we did is every single pre-game lobby, when you joined a game, you would just hold S and spacebar, which meant that if you joined a game, turned around and looked behind you, and there is somebody against the back wall just jumping up and down on the spot, you would immediately know that it was one of those top 10 players, and if you wanted to, you could just leave and go into the next queue. But obviously, this was only a really small percentage of those good players who knew about this strategy, which means that even if you did that, you were still pretty much guaranteed to end up with some other good players in your queue. So this didn't automatically make it a free win or anything. That being said, there were a few other methods that I used to identify people who didn't use that strategy. I don't know if it's still like this in modern tournaments, but at the time, when they obscured people's usernames, they would actually retain the exact same length and size of letters, which meant that if they had an I as the first letter of their name, for example, when you looked at the obscured name, it would be really skinny at the start. So there were some names that were really easy to recognize just off of their length or certain characters in certain positions like that. Also, you could still see some information such as their level head, so you could memorize that if you wanted to. And then finally, I personally was using Badlion client, and you could actually still see custom cosmetics, which meant that if you saw players with certain capes or hats, etc., then you knew right away that it was them. Also, in the first tournament, I just used some random PvP texture pack. So this time, I decided to use an all gray pack, which my friend Malaya made quite literally less than a day before the tournament started. As you might expect, the pack makes every single block the exact same gray texture, which makes players incredibly easy to see. Now, Badlion client actually has mods in it which allow you to change the color of players' hitboxes and name tags, so I set these both to really bright green, and combined with the gray pack, I could see players from pretty much anywhere. Similar to the last tournament, I played most of the maps while avoiding a few specific ones. I kept Demonic pretty much out of my rotation, but this time I also added Apex and Karanash because I think those are the maps that I play the worst on. And unlike last time, I actually intentionally queued the chaotic Woodstone map because I had just gotten pretty consistent at it. All of these arguably kind of cringe strategies worked extremely well for me, and I actually only got demoted from Grandmaster 2 times in the entire tournament. The first demotion was after I decided to wake up extra early to squeeze in a few games before I went out to spend the entire day with my grandma who had flown into town for the holidays. And that strategy did not pay off because basically I just lost like 3 or 4 games, then demoted. So after that happened, I just realized this was terrible. I never should have done this. The second demotion was quite a bit funnier because this one was to a player who I later found out that out of all 200 tournament games that he played, he only won 2 Grandmaster games, and one of them just happened to be the one that demoted me. In the end, I finished 4th, and I actually only missed the top 3 by 26 points, which means that if I had won just a single more game, I would have qualified for the top 3 rewards and gotten my hands on the infamous Blaze Pet, which is only given out to the top players every tournament. Despite losing my chance at those better rewards by such a small margin, I wasn't really bothered about it. The players who finished in front of me are all absolutely incredible at the game, and I legitimately believe that they're better Quake players than me. So when all said and done, I really can't disagree with the standings there. So big shoutouts to Uns, Aronix, and Dremery who finished top 3, and the entire rest of the top 10 for putting on such an amazing performance. Another fun note about this tournament was that once it ended, the guild I own, Chopped, owned not only the entire top 10, but also over 40 spots out of the top 100. But speaking of the top 100, unlike the first Quake tournament where there was only 1 ban, this one had a really shocking high amount, partially due to how many alts there were. But the most notable one for sure this time had to be Hand. You might remember that he finished 3rd in the first tournament, and this time he finished 9th. But after the games ended, he was banned and removed from the leaderboard. Unlike last time where it was for boosting, this time it happened to be a cheating ban. And the most likely reason for this is because he literally gave up. I was in a Discord call with him and he was screen sharing his last maybe 10 or 15 games or so, and even though we lowered the amount of games to play, 200 was still a lot and he was just completely done with it. So he was just intentionally dashing straight into walls and doing like 360 trick shots at every kill, basically just completely goofing off. After he was banned, a lot of players gamed at his defense, hashtag free hand was started, and his tweet about the situation got over 100 likes. Thankfully, he was actually unbanned this time before they announced the tournament results, and he was able to claim all of his rewards. So overall, despite the issues with stuff like alts and the fact that I had to stay up until like 4 a.m. every day so I could actually finish the tournament while still spending the day with my grandma, I really just had a blast with this tournament. And I know this video has been a fair amount of complaining, but I am really thankful that Hypixel continues to host these tournaments, even with the amount of work that it takes to make them. Like I said earlier, I just genuinely believe that Quakecraft is one of the best game modes for Hypixel's tournament format, and I really hope that sometime in the future they do a 3rd iteration, even if it makes all the Bed Wars mains really mad. After this second tournament ended, it pretty much marked the end of me playing the game consistently, but I do still absolutely love the game in the community, and I hope to continue to upload Quake videos to inspire people to try it out for themselves. So if you like Quake, or you just like me, a like and a sub would be greatly appreciated, and let me know your thoughts on Hypixel's tournaments down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I've been Rackles, and peace.